Lesson 3. Moving West. Make inferences. As you read, make inferences about people, places, and events in the new Western lands. Big idea. Colonists faced many challenges as they settled on lands farther west. Vocabulary: backcountry, loft. Settlers from Pennsylvania, especially the Germans and the Scotch-Irish, were among the first to settle farther inland away from the Atlantic coast. There they claimed what they saw as open land, even though American Indians lived there. They hoped to make a piece of the frontier into a farm where they could build a house and raise a family. They felt that moving to the frontier would give them a chance for a better life. The Great Wagon Road. In the early 1700s, most cities, towns, farms, and plantations in the 13 English colonies were located near the coast, in the coastal plain region. At that time, few colonists had settled in the Piedmont, the land between the coastal plain and the Appalachian Mountains. Settlers called this frontier region the backcountry because it was beyond, or in back of, the area settled by Europeans. The waterfalls in the rivers along the fall line and the lack of roads made travel to the backcountry difficult. To get around the waterfalls, settlers had to portage, or carry overland, their boats and supplies. This kind of travel was so difficult that it discouraged many settlers from moving inland. By the mid-1700s, many settlers in the 13 colonies began to settle in areas west of the coastal plain. From Pennsylvania, large numbers of German and Scotch-Irish immigrants had begun moving into the backcountry of Western Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. To get there, the settlers followed an old Indian trail. As more and more settlers used the trail, it became wider and wider. Finally, wagons could travel on it, and it became known as the Great Wagon Road. From Pennsylvania, the Great Wagon Road passed through the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia and along the eastern side of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The land there was hilly, and travel on the road was difficult. In places, it was so slippery the horses could not keep their footing, but fell to their knees, wrote one early traveler. However, the Great Wagon Road was the only way to get wagons loaded with household goods to the backcountry. Thousands of people followed the Great Wagon Road to move inland from Pennsylvania. Among them was a young man named Daniel Boone. When Boone was 16 years old, his family followed the Great Wagon Road to settle in the Yadkin Valley in North Carolina. The journey took more than a year. Later, Boone would become a well-known explorer who made new trails that took settlers even farther west. Review. Why was the Great Wagon Road important to the settlement of the frontier? A closer look. Frontier life. Life was hard and often lonely for early settlers in the backcountry. Family members had to work together to provide all the items they might need. 1. Chopping wood. 2. Farming. 3. Cleared land. 4. Candle making. 5. Churning butter. 6. Fire used for cooking and warmth. 7. Children's loft. 8. Mud between logs. In what ways is this frontier family self-sufficient? Life in the backcountry. Most of the people who settled the backcountry lived simply. Their homes were log huts with chimneys made of sticks and mud. Most homes had one room with a dirt floor and no windows. Light came through the open door in the daytime and from the fireplace at night. Families burned wood in the fireplace to cook their food and to keep warm. At night, the adults in a family spread their blankets over piles of dry leaves on the floor. The children slept in the loft, a part of the house between the ceiling and the roof. To get up to the loft, they climbed a ladder, which was often just wooden pegs driven into the wall. A settler named Oliver Johnson remembered sleeping in a loft when he was a child growing up on the frontier. He wrote, "If you slept in the loft, you pulled your head under the covers during a storm. When you got up in the morning, you would shake the snow off the covers, grab your shirt and breeches, pants, and hop down the ladder to the fireplace where it was good and warm." People on the frontier worked hard to get food, hunting in the forests and farming in the clearings. They farmed in the Indian way. They planted corn, beans, and squash all in the same mound of soil. The corn stalks provided a stake for the beans to climb. The squash vines spread out on the ground between the mounds. As families had done in early New England, frontier families made almost everything they needed. They churned their own butter, dyed their own cloth, and made their own soap and candles. Those who could not do things for themselves, a frontier minister observed in 1711, would have but a bad time of it, for help is not to be had at any rate. Life on the frontier was full of dangers. Families had to protect themselves not only from wild animals, but also from possible attacks from Indians or other settlers. Despite these dangers, people still moved farther and farther west. By the mid-1700s, English settlers had crossed the Appalachian Mountains into the Ohio Valley. The land that they moved into was also claimed by France. Review. How did frontier families get the food and goods they needed? Lesson 3 Review. Make inferences. What do you think life was like for English settlers in the Ohio Valley if the land they lived on was also being claimed by France? 1. Big idea. How did settlers meet the challenges of living on the frontier? 2. Vocabulary. Write a sentence about frontier life using the terms backcountry and loft. 3. History. Why did settlers move west? 4. Critical thinking. Synthesize. Why do you think settlers of the backcountry were willing to face the hardships there? Performance. Write a journal entry. Imagine that you are a settler who has moved to the frontier in the early 1700s. Write a journal entry in which you describe your journey to the backcountry and the building of your new home.